Hook the police had come for Elena with a gurney and zip ties, called by the brother who had never been her brother at all. But what they didn't know was that Leo's entire life, the gaslighting, the surveillance, the years of careful destruction, had been meticulously documented in a voice recording hidden in her pocket. And in 48 hours, his face would be on every news channel in the state. But that discovery had come much later. Everything began with dust and an attic, and a small pink diary with a broken lock. Elena descended the wooden steps from the attic. The pink diary clutched against her ribs. The air below was warmer, less suffocating with memory. She blinked against the transition from the harsh skylight glare to the softer hallway shadows. The dust motes that had danced in that single beam of light seemed to follow her, settling on her shoulders like a curse. The blue plastic bin had contained so much of her childhood. Old school papers, faded photographs, a music box with a dancing porcelain figure. But it was the diary that had stopped her cold. She sat on the edge of her bed, the same room where she'd kept that diary all those years ago. The silver padlock had been snapped off long ago, probably by time or an old curiosity. The cover was worn soft, the pink cardboard faded to the color of old bubble gum. She opened it carefully, as though the pages might crumble. The handwriting was hers, childish, looping, the letters growing larger and more frantic as the entries progressed. The ink she'd used was faded purple with glitter mixed in. She remembered buying it at the drugstore, remembered thinking it was the most sophisticated writing instrument ever created. She had been 9 years old. She turned the pages methodically. School complaints, crushes on boys in her class, drawings of horses, and then, dated June 12, 1998, an entry written in a hand that seemed to belong to a different child altogether. The letters were jagged, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through. Leo pushed me down the stairs today. He told Mom I tripped over my own shoelaces. Mom believed him. Elena closed her eyes. The memories surfaced like something pulled up from deep water, murky, distorted by time and the pressure of the depths. She had been 9. It had been summer. The stairs had been carpeted then, a soft beige that her mother had replaced 3 years later. But the memory that surfaced most vividly was not the fall itself. It was Leo's voice from much more recently. Last Christmas, at the family dinner table. Leo leaning back in his chair, wine glass raised, laughing in that particular way he had. Generous, inclusive, almost kind. You've always been clumsy, El. Remember when you fell down the stairs in '98? I tried to catch you. You were so scared. I still remember the way you cried. Elena's eyes snapped open. She had not cried. She remembered that clearly. She had bitten down so hard on her lip, trying not to cry, that she'd drawn blood. She turned through more pages. There were other entries that made her stomach tighten. October 1999. Leo locked me in the basement for 2 hours. When he let me out, he told Mom I'd gone there to hide because I was angry at her. She made me apologize. January 2001. I fell off the bookshelf today while looking for my book. My arm is black and blue. Leo said I should tell everyone I did it jumping off the couch because nobody would believe I'd been so stupid as to climb the shelves. I told them I jumped off the couch. Between the pages, she found a Polaroid photograph. It had that characteristic washed-out look of a photo from the early 2000s, the colors faded and shifting. In it, she saw herself as a child, her own small face, 10 years old perhaps, smiling widely. But the smile had the quality of a grimace, the kind of smile a child gives when they've been told to smile for the camera. On her upper arm, visible and unmistakable, was a bruise. It was deep purple and yellow, shaped like 4 fingers. Elena set the photograph down on her bed very carefully, as though it might break. She did not move for a long time. The afternoon light had shifted in the window, moving across her bedspread in a slow, inevitable crawl. The house around her was quiet. Her parents had died years ago. Her mother when Elena was in college, her father 5 years after that. Leo lived in the city, 45 minutes away. He had a high-powered job in tech. He was successful. He was, by all accounts, a good person. He was also downstairs. Elena had not heard him arrive. This was not unusual. Leo had a key to the family house, which their parents had left to him in their will. Elena lived in the city in a small apartment that she paid for herself. She came back to the family home rarely, and only when she had to. But Leo came to the house regularly, usually without warning, to check on things or retrieve items that he claimed still belonged to him. She heard his voice now, calling up the stairs. "El, you home?" Elena's hands trembled slightly as she closed the diary. She tucked it under her pillow as though concealing it might somehow change what she had learned. She descended the main stairs slowly. At the bottom, Leo stood in the entryway, holding a glass of iced tea. He wore a dark navy sweater that looked expensive. He was tall, taller than Elena, with the kind of effortless physical confidence that came from growing up assured of his own rightness. His hair was dark and perfectly styled. His face, at that moment, was composed into an expression of casual curiosity. "What have you got there, El? Digging up old trash?" he asked. His eyes had moved to the diary in her hands. Elena had not realized she was still holding it. He set his glass on a side table with deliberate care. His voice had become very soft. "You've always had quite an imagination, El." "It's not imagination. I was there. It happened." Leo climbed the first 3 steps of the stairs, his eyes never leaving her face. "You were a strange kid, always making things up, wanting attention." Elena descended 3 more steps toward him, her grip tightening on the diary. "I'm not making this up. You're crazy," Leo said. The words came out quietly, almost conversationally. "You were always making things up for attention." Elena held the diary out over the banister. "You lied to Mom for 20 years. Leo moved with a speed that seemed impossible. He lunged up the remaining stairs, his hands reaching for her wrists. Both of his hands closed around her arm, twisting it to get the diary. Elena tried to pull back, but his grip was immovable. The diary fell from her fingers, tumbling through the air with a sound that seemed to last forever. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "You're crazy," Leo hissed, his face inches from hers. "You were always making things up for attention." Elena pushed at his chest with her free hand. She struck him with the heel of her palm, putting all her weight into it. For a moment, his grip on her arm loosened. Then he shoved her backward, hard. Her back slammed against the wall. Behind her, a framed family portrait, the 4 of them at some vacation years ago, shifted and fell. The glass shattered with a sound like a gunshot. A spiderweb crack appeared across the image, right across the faces of their parents. Leo stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of mock peace. He looked down at the diary on the floor and kicked it away into the shadows of the hallway, where it came to rest beneath a console table. "Look at you," Leo said, his breathing slightly elevated, his composure already reasserting itself like a mask sliding back into place. "Seeing things, acting out, just like when we were kids." He descended the stairs without looking back at her. She heard him pick up his glass, heard the clink of ice. She heard his footsteps moving away from the stairs, toward the kitchen. He was humming something low and tuneless. Elena remained where she was, her back against the wall, her arm throbbing where he had gripped it. She looked at the cracked glass of the family portrait, at the diary barely visible in the shadows beneath the console table, at the front door, which suddenly seemed very far away. She did not move for a long time. 2 hours later, when she heard Leo's car pulling out of the driveway, Elena climbed the stairs to his office. The door was locked, as it always was. Leo did not like anyone in his office. He had made this clear when he was in middle school and had continued to enforce it into his adult life. No one entered the office. No one touched his things. Elena used a silver Visa card to jimmy the lock. The mechanism was older than she would have expected, and it gave way with surprising ease. Just a small click, and the door swung inward. The office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The floor was covered in a plush shag rug that silenced her footsteps. The windows were covered with heavy blackout curtains that Leo had hung years ago. She sat at his mahogany desk. The surface was clear except for a keyboard, a mouse, and 2 large monitors. She reached out and moved the mouse. The screens glowed to life, casting a blue light across her face. The desktop was clean and organized, entirely unlike her own cluttered computer. There was a single folder on the desktop labeled E-Documentation in clean sans serif font. Elena clicked on it. The folder opened to reveal dozens of video files. They were organized by date and location. E. Kitchen nov2.mp4. E. Bedroom sep15.mp4. E. Living room oct8.mp4. There were hundreds of them. She double-clicked on the first file. The video player opened and filled the screen with a grainy, high-angle view of a kitchen. It took her a moment to recognize it as her own kitchen. The angle was from near the ceiling, pointed downward. In the video, she watched herself from 3 weeks ago. Moving around the space, making tea, stirring in honey, walking out of frame. The video continued, playing in silence. Nothing happened in it. She simply made her tea and left. But the very fact of it existing, the knowledge that Leo had somehow gotten a camera into her apartment, made her stomach turn. She closed that video and opened another. E. Kitchen nov2.mp4. Again, her kitchen. Again, herself, filmed from above, going about her normal life. She looked down at the keyboard and typed gas into the search bar. A file appeared, gas schedule txt. She opened it. The document was simple, organized by date in reverse chronological order. Each entry contained an action and a time. Nov 14, move keys to freezer, 2:30 a.m. Nov 16, unplug alarm clock, 3:15 a.m. Nov 9, rearrange kitchen cabinet, 2:45 a.m. Nova 3, move book from shelf to floor, 3:10 a.m. Osk 28, adjust thermostat, 2:50 a.m. Oct 18, move her phone charger, 2:20 a.m. The list went on, extending back nearly a year. And with each action, Elena recognized moments from her own life. The keys. She had looked everywhere for those keys. She had torn her apartment apart, searching for them. She had convinced herself that she was losing her mind, that she was becoming forgetful and unreliable. She had apologized to her landlord for losing them. She had paid for new locks, the alarm clock. She had been late to work twice because of that. She had blamed herself, had wondered if she was developing some kind of sleep disorder. The thermostat. She had been so cold that day. She had thought she was getting sick. Elena heard the sound of a garage door opening downstairs. She moved without thinking, without planning. She closed the computer, minimizing the windows with frantic clicks of the mouse. She ran to the office door and pulled it closed behind her, locking it with shaking hands. She was halfway down the hallway when Leo's voice carried up the stairs. "El?" You still here? I forgot my wallet. Elena did not answer. She moved quickly to her car, which was parked in the driveway. She had taken only the keys from the kitchen, where she had found them, in the freezer, exactly where the schedule said they would be. She drove without looking in her mirrors, focusing only on the road ahead of her, and the growing certainty that nothing she had known about her own life was true. The rain had begun by the time Elena reached the neighborhood streets. It fell in heavy sheets, drumming on her windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. She drove without a clear destination, her hands locked on the wheel, her breath shallow. She heard the engine before she saw the headlights. A black SUV, pulling up behind her, its grille suddenly filling her entire rear-view mirror. Leo was not bothering with subtlety anymore. He was not even pretending to be cautious. He was not even alone. She could see the outline of his head, the angle of his shoulders. He was leaning forward over the steering wheel with an intensity that suggested a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what he was. Elena pressed the accelerator. Her silver sedan responded, jumping forward, but not fast enough. The SUV followed, maintaining the distance between them with the precision of something much more powerful and much less merciful. Rain hammered against the windshield. The wipers were losing the battle. A delivery truck loomed ahead of her, its brake lights glowing red in the downpour. Elena jerked the wheel, pulling around it. For just a moment, the truck was between her and Leo's SUV. She heard the collision, the metal grinding sound of his vehicle hitting the truck instead of her. But it did not slow him down for long. He swerved around the truck, and the black SUV was behind her again. The streets were slick and treacherous. Elena made a sharp U-turn, using the wet pavement to her advantage. Her tires slid sideways, the car fishtailing before the traction control reasserted itself. She aimed for a narrow alleyway between two brick buildings, knowing that Leo's larger vehicle might not fit. The SUV was still behind her, but the alleyway was narrow enough that the mirrors on both sides were nearly clipping the walls. She accelerated into it, the brick walls closing in like the sides of a trap. Behind her, she heard the sharp screech of metal on stone. The SUV's side mirror caught the brick wall and exploded into plastic shards. Leo did not slow down. He was close enough that she could see his face in her mirror, twisted with something that looked like rage but might have been something else entirely. Something worse. Something more calculated. Elena burst out of the alleyway onto a main street. Traffic was lighter here at the edge of the city. She drove without awareness of where she was going, only that she was going forward, away from the black SUV that refused to fall back, refused to relent. She drove for nearly 20 minutes before she noticed the lights behind her were gone. She drove for another 10 minutes before she allowed herself to believe it. She drove to the office of Dr. Aris, her therapist of nearly 15 years. The waiting room was painted a soothing blue, and the chairs were upholstered in soft velvet the color of dawn. There was a white noise machine in the corner, masking the sounds from the hallway. The entire room was designed to communicate one thing: safety. Elena sat in one of the blue velvet chairs and did not feel safe at all. Dr. Aris emerged from her inner office. She was an older woman with gray hair cut in a bob and glasses on a beaded chain. She had always reminded Elena of a benevolent librarian, someone who had dedicated her life to ordering chaos and finding truth in the small stories people told themselves. She took one look at Elena, at the tear in her sleeve, the mud on her jeans, the wild expression in her eyes, and her face shifted into an expression of deep concern. "Elena, what's happened to you?" Elena followed her into the inner office. It was decorated in the same calming palette as the waiting room. Dr. Aris gestured for Elena to sit in her usual chair, the one by the window that looked out onto a courtyard. Elena sat, and before she could stop the words, they came spilling out. "He's been watching me," Elena said. "I found videos on his computer. He's put cameras in my apartment. He's been moving things in my house to make me think I'm losing my mind. It's been happening for over a year. The keys, the alarm clock, the thermostat, everything. He's got it all written down in a schedule. He goes into my apartment in the middle of the night and moves things. And my neighbors must not have seen him because he must know the building, or he must be using something to bypass the lock, or—" "Elena," Dr. Aris said gently. Elena stopped mid-sentence. The therapist set down her yellow notepad on the side table. Her expression had changed. It was no longer concerned. It was something closer to pity. "I need to tell you something," Dr. Aris continued. "Leo called me yesterday. He's very worried about you." The words seemed to come from very far away, as though Elena were hearing them from underwater. "What did he say?" Elena asked. Dr. Aris stood and walked to a drawer in her desk. She withdrew a manila folder and slid it across the glass table between them. "He sent me these. He's been documenting your episodes." Elena opened the folder with numb fingers. Inside were photographs. Clear, high-resolution photographs. And in each one, she saw herself. Elena placing a small camera in the corner of a kitchen. Elena standing on a chair, adjusting something on a wall. Elena looking directly at the camera with wild eyes, her expression unhinged, manic. But Elena had never placed any cameras. Elena had never done any of these things. The photographs were impossible, except they weren't impossible. They existed. She was holding them in her hands. "I don't understand," Elena said. "I know, honey," Dr. Aris said. Her voice was very kind, very gentle. "Leo thinks you may be experiencing a break with reality. He says this isn't the first time. He says you've had episodes before where you've created elaborate stories. They're not stories. The hard drive is real. The surveillance is real." "The hard drive," Dr. Aris repeated. She looked genuinely sad. "Elena, do you hear how this sounds?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Aris had already picked up the phone on her desk. She dialed 3 numbers with a steady hand. "I think it's time we talk about a 72-hour observation," Dr. Aris said into the phone. "For her safety, for everyone's safety." Elena stood up. She tried to move toward the door, but Dr. Aris was suddenly standing between her and the exit, still holding the phone, still speaking in that gentle, patient voice that Elena had trusted for 15 years. "Elena," Dr. Aris said, "I'm trying to help you." Elena ran. That night, Elena went to the greenhouse. The estate had been in their family for 3 generations. It sprawled across 5 acres in the suburbs, with manicured lawns and gardens that had once been maintained by a professional landscaper. In recent years, with their parents gone and the property maintained only sporadically, it had begun to slip into a kind of wild state. The grounds were overgrown. The roses had gone feral. The greenhouse, however, the greenhouse remained somehow preserved, as though time had marked it as important and had decided to leave it untouched. Elena remembered the greenhouse from her childhood. She remembered spending long hours there during summer, hiding among the ferns and potted palms, reading books, or simply sitting in silence, listening to the sound of insects and the soft drip of the watering system. It had been her refuge then. It seemed like the only logical place to go now. She parked her car a quarter-mile away on a rural road that backed onto the property and walked through the woods. The night was cool and quiet. Owls called to each other across the darkness. Elena's phone, when she checked it, showed no signal. This was good. This meant Leo could not track her. Or it was bad, because it meant she had no way to call for help if something went wrong. She did not think too closely about that distinction. The greenhouse appeared through the trees, like something from a different era, its glass panels catching the moonlight and holding it. Elena moved quietly toward it, slipping through the unlocked side entrance. The air inside was warm and humid, heavy with the smell of growing things. Ferns brushed against her face, dripping moisture. Potted palms rose up like sentries in the darkness. She knew where to look. When they were children, Leo had sometimes hidden money in the greenhouse, buried beneath the planting soil in various locations. It was a habit he had maintained into adulthood, she now suspected, because he was paranoid about financial institutions, or because he was paranoid in general. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Elena made her way to the large stone planter near the back of the greenhouse, the one that had been there since before she was born. She found a small silver trowel hanging on the wall where it had always hung. She began to dig. The earth was soft and welcoming. Her hands sank into it, finding the cool satisfaction of soil and worms and the small, patient processes of growth. She dug for several minutes before the trowel struck something hard. She cleared away the dirt and lifted out a black, waterproof pelican case. It was the kind of case that photographers or filmmakers use to protect their equipment. It was heavy. She unsnapped the latches and found inside a single external hard drive, the kind used for backing up computer data, and a USB cable. The hard drive was labeled in neat handwriting, LR Backup. Elena held the hard drive in her hands. It was warm from being buried in the earth. In this small device was everything she needed. All the proof, all the evidence, all the documentation of what Leo had done. With this, she could go to the police. She could clear her own name. She could convince anyone that she was not the unreliable, paranoid woman who Dr. Eris had so gently suggested she was. She was still holding the hard drive when the greenhouse door creaked open. Leo stood silhouetted against the night sky, his frame blocking the entrance. In his hands, he held a pair of iron garden shears. They were long and rusted at the pivot point, the kind of shears used for heavy-duty pruning. They looked, in the darkness, less like a gardening tool and more like an instrument of torture. "You always were a good hider, El," Leo said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "But I'm better at finding." Elena ran. She sprinted between the potted palms, her footsteps silent on the soft ground of the greenhouse. Behind her, she heard the crash of Leo's body moving through the vegetation, less careful than she was, more direct. She grabbed a heavy ceramic pot and hurled it backward over her shoulder without looking. She heard the crash as it shattered. She heard Leo curse softly. She veered left, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a glass misting bottle, one of the old ones, heavy and full of water. She spun and threw it. The connection was solid, the glass striking Leo's temple with a wet thud. He stumbled, his hand going to his head. Elena did not wait to see if he fell. She sprinted back toward the entrance, the hard drive still clutched in her hand. She was almost to the door when Leo recovered. His arm came around her waist from behind, pulling her backward. They fell to the ground together, landing hard on the gravel path that ran through the center of the greenhouse. Elena's breath was driven from her lungs. She struggled, trying to create space between them. Leo climbed on top of her. His hand came down hard, and she felt the punch land on her stomach. It was an efficient blow, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Elena gasped, unable to breathe. unable to think of anything except that she needed air, that she was dying, that this was what dying felt like. Leo grabbed the hard drive from her hand. She tried to hold on, but her body was not responding to her commands. Leo pulled it away easily. He stood up, still breathing heavily, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He patted his pocket, checking that something was safely stored inside. Then he reached into that pocket and withdrew a heavy padlock. "Stay," he said. It was not a request. He walked out of the greenhouse. Elena heard the metallic clang as the lock was closed. Then she heard the sound of his footsteps moving away, becoming quieter, more distant, until she could not hear them anymore. She was alone in the greenhouse. The door was locked. It was night. No one knew where she was. Elena sat on the cold floor of the greenhouse for a very long time. Her stomach was screaming. Her hands were shaking. Her phone, which she checked repeatedly, showed no signal. The battery indicator was dropping steadily. She was not sure if that was real or if Leo had done something to it as well. Put something in the system files to make it display false information. She was not sure of anything anymore. She looked under the wooden potting bench and found a small wooden box that had once housed gardening supplies. It was old and rotted, its corners soft with moisture. She opened it because opening it was an action, and actions were all she had left. Inside was an envelope, an old envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, written in handwriting she recognized as her mother's, were the words, "To be opened only by Elena." Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. It was an official document, embossed with a seal. The name on it read, Leo Richard. The birth date was January 15th, 1992, and beneath the blank line labeled biological parents, someone had written in their own hand, adopted. Below the birth certificate was a letter, also in her mother's handwriting. The ink was faded and the paper was fragile. Elena unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Elena, I am writing this in case I am not able to tell you face to face. There are things you deserve to know, things I should have told you years ago. Leo was adopted when you were 2 years old. I thought it would be good for you to have a brother. I thought it would be good for our family. But I was wrong. From the moment they brought him home from the agency, something about him was wrong. I cannot explain it better than that. Something in the way he looked at you. Something in the way he smiled. I stayed because of you. Because I was afraid of what would happen to you if I left. Because I thought my presence might be the only thing keeping him in check. But I think I have been wrong about that too. I think my staying only gave him license to continue. He was never mine. He was never truly ours. And I am afraid, so afraid, that he is something much worse than a troubled child. I am afraid he is something that cannot be fixed. I love you, Elena. I have always loved you. And I am sorry I was not brave enough to save you from him. I am sorry I was not brave enough to save myself. Your mother, Catherine. Below the letter was a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Woman dies in fall at family estate, ruled accidental. The date on the clipping was March 15th, 2002. Elena looked at the adoption date on Leo's birth certificate. It was January 1992. The clumsy accidents had started in 1998. The letter was dated February 2002, 1 month before her mother died. Elena did not move for a very long time. The blue and red lights appeared against the glass of the greenhouse first, flashing, distant, then suddenly very close. Elena had stopped expecting help from anyone. She had stopped expecting anything. But she stood up anyway and moved to the glass wall. She pressed her hands against it and began to bang. Help! she shouted, though she was not sure anyone could hear her through the greenhouse walls. "In here! I'm trapped!" Her voice was hoarse from the cold. The lights continued to flash. She could see figures moving in the courtyard outside. She recognized Leo's silhouette, pointing toward the greenhouse. She recognized the shape of Dr. Aris standing beside him. A police officer approached the locked door, flashlight beams sweeping across the glass. Behind him came another officer, pushing a gurney. The gurney had zip ties attached to its sides. Elena's hands moved away from the glass. She looked around the greenhouse. The darkness was absolute except for the flashing red and blue lights that turned the vegetation into alternating shades of color. She thought about the letter in her pocket. She thought about the article, cut from a newspaper, dated 2002. She thought about her mother, who had tried to tell her the truth, and who had died before she could make sure Elena understood. She thought about the concrete tunnel beneath the greenhouse floor. When she was a child, she had explored it once, crawling through the darkness behind her father as he checked the greenhouse's drainage system. She remembered the tunnel was narrow and low. She remembered it led to a culvert that emptied out beyond the estate wall, into an area overgrown with ivy. Elena moved across the greenhouse floor quickly and quietly. She threw aside the heavy bag of mulch that sat beside the drainage pipe. She found the metal grate that she had found so many years ago, and she pulled it up. The opening was dark and smelled of wet earth. She lowered herself into it, feet first, and felt the concrete of the tunnel floor beneath her shoes. Behind her, through the greenhouse glass, she heard the sound of the first officer's radio crackling to life. The officer was speaking into it, probably reporting what he saw. Probably describing a woman having a psychiatric episode, hiding in a greenhouse, clearly unstable, clearly dangerous to herself. Elena crawled into the tunnel. The space was so narrow that she could barely fit her shoulders through. She moved forward on her elbows, her breath echoing in the confined space. The letter from her mother was still clutched in her teeth. The darkness was complete. There was no light, no reference point, only the texture of concrete beneath her body and the sound of her own movement. She crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The tunnel seemed to stretch on infinitely. Her elbows were bleeding from scraping against the concrete. Her breath came in panicked gasps. But she continued forward because stopping was not an option. Then suddenly, she could see light. Just a thin line of it. A crack in the darkness. She crawled toward it with renewed effort. The light grew larger. She could smell fresh air, could feel a slight breeze. She emerged from the drainage pipe into the night air, her body covered in mud and water, her hair tangled with leaves and debris. Behind her, through the dense ivy, she could see the flashing lights of the police cars. She heard voices calling her name. Professional voices, concerned voices, voices that did not believe her. Elena stood up. She began to run toward the main road. Her footsteps crunched on gravel, then on pavement. The street was quiet at this late hour. A single car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating her mud-covered figure. The driver did not slow down. Elena kept running. The Channel 8 news station was located in a building of modern glass and steel. The lobby was open 24 hours because news does not respect regular business hours. Elena burst through the glass doors, soaking wet, covered in mud and blood and greenhouse debris. The security guard looked up from his desk with an expression that suggested he saw people like this all the time. And half of them were problems that he did not get paid enough to address. Elena slammed the birth certificate and her mother's letter onto the reception desk. "Call Sarah Jenkins," she said. Her voice was hoarse from screaming, raw from cold air and fear. "Tell her the Richard sibling story isn't a tragic breakdown. It's a crime. The receptionist was young, probably not more than 22, and she looked like she had never been asked to do anything more complicated than direct callers to the right extension. "I'm not sure," she began. "Sarah Jenkins," Elena repeated. "Channel 8. She interviewed me 3 months ago about my brother. Tell her I have proof that everything I said was true. Tell her I have documentation." Elena's phone had survived the crawl through the tunnel somehow, though it was waterlogged and barely functioning. She pulled it out with shaking hands and unlocked the voice memos app. She pressed play. The audio crackled to life. It was from the greenhouse. It was Leo's voice, low and menacing. "You always were a good hider, Elle, but I'm better at finding." Then, "Stay." And then, cutting across the recording, the sound of his footsteps walking away, the sound of the padlock closing, the sound